Welcome. Today we're going to talk about your multiple personalities. And yes, we all have them. But which one is the captain of your ship? So pull up a chair, grab a drink, and let's talk about all your personalities.
Welcome back to Shrinks on Tap. I'm your host, Dr. Lauren Fisher, and
I am Dr. Eleni Boosalis. And today we are talking about your multiple personalities and which one's in charge. But first, we're going to talk about our drink.
So what'd you pick today, Eleni?
So today I picked Mingle Mocktails for the sober curious market, but you can add vodka if you like, but we're not today. And it is a women-owned business, no gluten, low sugar, low calories. So it's fabulous if you want to just not drink, but you want to sip on something good. And I love the Cosmo because it reminds me of Sex and the City, you know, my 90s days. So
Love a good Cosmo. I'm going to taste it.
Yeah, it is. So it's not too sugary.
It's quite delightful.
It's really good. So shout out to this company, Mingle.
Yeah, especially being woman-owned. So thank you. So I thought this was actually a great drink you picked because it's sober curious, and curiosity is going to be a big theme today because we're going to be curious about all of the personalities that you have.
Yes. And you know, you might be wondering, hey, I don't have multiple personalities. What are you talking about? But actually we all do. We all have them. You know, when we think about multiple personalities, we think that people are, you know, like Sybil if you're around in the 80s, but it's kind of a lesser degree than that. But yeah,
you're in charge. It only becomes pathological when you don't know they exist. But the reality is we all have many different parts of us. And we love talking about this because the more that we become aware of our parts, the better we understand them. So what are some of the parts that get people's attention the most?
I think a big one is anger, right? People come into therapy and they're like, I think I need anger management. That's a big one. Depression is another one. You know, sometimes people panic. The over manager, the one that's like has to have everything done perfectly, perfectionistically, especially here in this DC area, people are very type A. That's a part. So
the self-critic.
And, you know, when we talk about, well, why is this helpful? Meaning that why are all parts good? Right? That's part of this, to be curious, because all your parts are good, because they're trying to help you, even if they're dysfunctional.
Yeah, so let's take a step back because I think people come in and they say, I have anxiety or I have depression, but they're not thinking about that as actually maybe possibly being a part. Sometimes it is just, an actual condition and emotion, but sometimes they're actual parts. So why are parts like important? Like, tell me just a little bit about what the system.
So I guess when you ask, how do I even know I'm in a part? And we would say that if you are not in your self energy, meaning that you're not what the 8 C's are that Richard Schwartz talk about, the guy that created this, that you're not like content, calm, creative. Like basically you're not like in a chill, content way, but then you're operating out of a part, right? So if you are I hear people say, well, I'm just an angry person, you know, or I'm just a perfectionistic person. Then we challenge you and say, you're not actually that. That's a part of you. And you know you're not in self-energy, what we call, if you're operating out of a part that's not content and calm and chill, basically, right? So if somebody says, I'm an angry person, then that is an overdeveloped part that is there to protect you and serve you. So we have to look at it with curiosity and gratitude and ask it, how is it helping you? It is helping you in some way. Even if it's harming you, it's also helping you survive. So that's kind of like, difficult part to wrap our minds around, that there is a positive intention behind this part.
Yeah, like all parts are working like for us to like function normally on a daily basis. So when you talk about this like calm, chill part, like it's sort of made some people think like their higher, wiser self, the part that like makes good decisions and things like that. So if you're thinking about like a a bus and you've got the driver, and the driver is like taking care of all of the kids in the back of the bus, but all the kids are your parts. You got the angry part, a manager, perfectionist, the critic. Some are quiet, some are loud, some are directing, and everything's like fine if they all do their job when they're supposed to. But if like the anxious part takes over the bus, right? Can you imagine what the bus is like? Like, driving like nuts, right? So how does that translate into life?
Okay, so let's say in life, a good way to think of it or to identify when you get into a part is there a person that really gets your goat, like really pisses you off? Like think of somebody in your life that triggers you. And when you're around them, you can't be in this calm state. And you just like, oh, it's them, right? It's something they did. It's something they say. It's their energy. Well, actually, it's a part. So I think this is what's helpful about this whole thing is it forces you to look inward. So if somebody is pissing you off, triggering you, making you anxious, whatever it is, and you're like, oh, that person, then this is a part of you. So you stop, reflect, and go, okay, what does this feeling remind me of? What is the early summary I have of this feeling? And if I didn't do this behavior right now, what would happen to me? So it kind of becomes this like what we call unblending from the parts. You can look at it and get to know it like a person. And then most of the time when people are able to sit quietly and do this, they can identify like, oh yeah, this person reminds me of my mother and the way my mother would talk to me when I was younger, or my father or my sibling. And I had to do this behavior in order to survive in that environment. So now when you're in a similar environment that in your brain reminds you of that situation, that part shows up and goes, oh shit, you got to do this behavior right now. Otherwise, you're going to be punished or ignored or fill in the blank. So it's very much like a reactive thing we automatically get into, but most people don't stop to reflect.
Yeah.
Why is this person pissing me off right now? Right.
Right. And you'll notice because every part has its own sets of thoughts, actions, and like sensations. So I think that was a good example. Like you might be chill and then all of a sudden you're in this activated state, right? Like your body's getting rigid or you're getting angry, right? You're thinking things, you're saying, so you'll feel there's a shift. And we don't need to notice the shifts when everything's working the way it's supposed to. But a lot of times people start, when something feels out of alignment, like the anger part's always showing up, right? Or the anxious part, that's when people start to question like, ooh, like why is this here so much? And I think you brought up a really good point that like some of that, again, is protective because it had to be back in the day parts of you. And that's the hurt parts that are like carrying like wounds or trauma from the past. Like these parts, these defensive parts are coming out to protect you. But sometimes they're protecting you when they don't need to.
Yeah, they're overworked and they're tired.
Yeah.
Like how many times people come into the office and they're like, I'm just so tired of over intellectualizing everything. I'm like, that's a part. It's working hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or people are like, I have anger problems. I'm an angry person, and then like, so say like you're an angry person. We're like, oh, you have problems with anger. So you have a part that's showing up more than others. Like, and to be curious about it. And that I think is what is a big difference because people often, when there's a part of them they do not like, they shame it or hide it, right? We are the worst to ourselves. We will judge ourselves more harshly than anyone else ever will. So we hide things instead of being like, why is that anger part coming out, as you mentioned?
Yeah. And, a universal truth, I think, is the more you resist something, the more it will persist. So that's one of the things that happen in therapy is people come in with different approaches, not ours. That's why we're holistic. And they're like, okay, let's deal with this angry part and like tamper it down and teach you coping skills. But with this approach, we would be like, no, let's bring it in and thank it. And be curious about it and ask it how it's taking care of you and serving you. And it's amazing when you watch people in therapy and they're like, oh, my other therapist wanted me to deal with my, like anger or drinking, or even one guy, the suicidal part. He wasn't all suicidal, otherwise he wouldn't be there. There was a part of him that would show up. And it was like, as soon as you invite that part and question it and how it's serving you and why it's there and be curious about it and how long it's been there, then most of the time people's part will relax or give you some space to look at it rather than you got to go away and I got to get rid of this. That just doesn't tend to work.
I must say, I know it sounds a little Looney Tunes. I say this to my clients too. You know, you're like questioning and talking to like different parts of your brain, but they never fails. They give you answers. And so like, you know, there's ways where you're just asking or you're writing like, what are you here for? What are you protecting me from? And, you know, when you realize it's trying to help you, even the critic, like, right, everyone's got a critic, and sometimes critics are really harsh and they're like, what are you trying to help me with? They're like, we're trying to make sure you don't look like a fool, you know, or that no one makes fun of you, right? And then you're like, oh, okay. But we want the methodology change of the critic, because sometimes the critic can be very hard. But when we start to like, I think you're right. And maybe even being thankful, like you said, thank you for trying to help me, but like your methods suck.
Well, and the critic can also help you get that promotion, right? Because people tell me all the time, they're like, oh, but if the critic wasn't there, I wouldn't have gotten promoted. I wouldn't be a workaholic. I wouldn't be working out as much, whatever it is. So it has this positive outcome sometimes.
Yeah. Like we want all parts in balance. We want them to show up when they need to. Like anger is a very like great protector. Like you very much may need to use that at times to advocate or in a, you know, situation that's like threatening, right, for survival. But you want to be able to use it when it's supposed to be used, right?
Yeah. So if we take it to like, what's the point of this whole conversation, right? What is the point? It's that if there's these parts that are overacting, if we can stop and have a dialogue with them and ask it, okay, how is it serving me? So let's say the angry part is protecting you. Okay. So like when this person comes around and you get pissed off, the angry part comes in to save you. What if you talk to the angry part and you ask like, what would you be afraid would happen to me if you didn't do this job? And it's like, oh, well, you would get annihilated. Okay. Well, if you ask the part, how old do you think I am? 99% of the time in session, does this happen to you? They're like, oh, it's 7 years old, right? It's always a child part. It's pretty much. And so when you say, I'm not 8, I'm like 35 or whatever the person age is, then the part can go, oh, so you can take care of yourself by putting up boundaries, communicating, saying no, not overexerting yourself. You can take care of yourself without being angry. So then the angry part can relax a little bit when it understands you're not like an 8-year-old that needs it to do this job for you all the time. I think that's the point, right?
Yeah, it is. And I mean, that gets into like a little bit deeper layer there because, you know, when people come in just about anxious or angry parts, and we work on modifying the thoughts and behaviors. And if you are like modifying, and a lot of times just that awareness can slow everything down. You can modify those parts. But if you feel like those parts are still showing up, I think when we question, we get like, oh, hey, yeah, it thinks you're 7 years old. Then that's our sign that there is an unresolved part of like unresolved. We're going to use the word trauma, a part of you from the past that's still holding on to that pain. And that's where the therapy part comes into hand. Like that's a good sign of when maybe I need to go to therapy because I still keep having these like defensive reactions. And the reality is because your protectors don't know that you're not in dangerous situation anymore or overwhelming situation, because mostly often it was a time where you were, you know, flooded with emotions, powerless or unable to like control your circumstances. So that's why these protectors like come in. And like, for example, the addict's a good one, you know, so if a hurt part of you from the past gets stimulated that holds a lot of pain, some of the parts come in like that, like, let me drink it away, let me binge, let me scroll, let me dissociate, you know, because it wants you to mute that emotion as quick as possible. So it's not that you have poor self-control, which sometimes people do. It's actually that part's really trying to protect you because it feels like you're in danger.
Yeah, and oftentimes these parts, to take it another step, is they have beliefs. So this is why they're doing what they're doing. So this example you just gave of the let me go drink and numb myself, there might be a belief under there that's like, I can't handle emotion, right? Or this doesn't feel safe, or I don't have control. And, you know, most of the time, if you think about beliefs and what these parts carry, it has to do with safety or control. That tends to be the most common things. ask yourself, what would happen to me? I wouldn't be safe. I would be powerless. So it's just like, like really looking inward and asking yourself instead of pointing outward as like, why is that person pissing me off?
Yeah.
Like it's their fault, right? I heard somebody in my session say, I thought it was so funny. He said, if you leave the house every day and you run into an asshole, they're the asshole. But if you run into like 20 assholes, you're probably the asshole.
No, it's
that funny. But I'm thinking that, like, I don't know how that applies to this, but that maybe you're walking around with your angry part all over the place, thinking it's everybody else's.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that's always like, they triggered me, right? Well, they may have their unhealed parts are triggering you, but that's usually a sign if you're getting triggered, there's some part of you that's unhealed that needs to be attended to. Because when we bring like our unhealed parts into like, into awareness and they're no longer triggered, we can stay in a place of compassion and we could see people more clearly and be like, oh, look at all their shit. It doesn't need to become our shit,
Yeah, you can really observe it. Use some distance. There is an exercise that Dr. Schwartz does in his classes where he has you imagine this person that's triggering you in a house. And so they're like completely separate from you. You can see them through the window and imagine them doing all the stuff they're doing that pisses you off, but like you're completely protected. And it's a really beautiful meditation, but essentially what happens is you start to feel compassion for them, which is the self. Like when we're in self, we're in compassion. And you start to realize you don't need that anger right now to protect yourself from them because you're protected from them by this house. And so now you can see their pain and their, trauma, and you can look at them with some compassion instead of the angry part showing up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And you mentioned Dick Schwartz. He is the founder of Internal Family Systems, and that's the framework. And I got to say, by far, this has been my most favorite framework to understand myself and others because it's also fun and playful too, and a lot of times when I'll say to my clients, I'll be like, what does your inner critic look like, or how does he or she sound? First of all, does it sound like a male? Is it a female? What do they look like? And I always picture mine with like this clipboard with high heels running around, writing things like nonstop. You missed that. You didn't do that. You got to do this, blah, 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 blah. And so when you start like even picturing, that gives you a lot of information also too. And so just trying to be like playful and curious instead of like shaming of ourselves. It's just a much easier way to just try to understand. I think I was telling you this example earlier of like, and I mean, we nerd out a lot. We love analyzing ourselves. You can't stop it sometimes. But like, I was like, I don't know, sitting with this a couple of years ago, and I was sitting next to this gentleman that I was having coffee with, and he ended up picking up his phone and just like went ahead and like picked up a phone call without being like, oh my gosh, I have to get this. Excuse me one second. He just picked it up without saying anything in the middle of our conversation and started talking. And I immediately looked at my body language. All of a sudden, my legs crossed the other way. My arms crossed. I got stiff and I was like, screw this guy. I'm like, I'm leaving this conversation. Like, how rude is that? And I was like, oh my God, look at it. My body changed. Everything changed so quickly. So I was kind of laughing and I'm like, why is this? Because it hit on like this feeling of like feeling rejected, right? From the past. And like, yes, he absolutely should have handled that differently. But I noticed how quick it just pulled out a part of me. And I'm a big dissociator. I'll be like, okay, see you later. You won't even know I'm gone. Bye.
Yeah.
And, but what I did was, because, now that I have many years of practice, like I reoriented my body back into like self. And then I just shared with him. I'm like, hey, I'm like, next time you got to take a call, just let me know. I'm getting on a call, and I was able to communicate that. And he was like, yeah, I'm sorry about that. And that was that,
Yeah, that's a great example because sometimes people would say, but wait, wasn't that actually rude? Shouldn't I be mad about that? Well, it's like what you said, what you handled. It's that was rude and it annoyed you, but it's the noticing that it triggers us.
Yeah.
The noticing. And then do we get a part that comes out that goes, screw that guy, I'm leaving, who does he think he is? And then we get caught up in this story rather than, yeah, that was rude. It brought up a part. I'm going to address it. I noticed it in my body and now I'm going to resolve it. I'm not going to let it like carry me away and take over. That's, I guess,
Yeah.
how you handled it.
Yeah, I mean, isn't that like the whole point? Everything is like, yeah, the minute we notice stuff, right, and we become aware, what do they say? There's that power between the stimulus and the response. When we slow things down, there's a lot of power, right? But most of the times we're doing things unconsciously. So that's why a part slips in that you haven't been thinking about and reacts, right? And then we're in this cycle, right, with someone where we're like, oh, yeah, they're rude. I'm reacting. We get stuck in cycles with people. But when we can stop and pause, right, then we can choose to react differently,
Yeah. So what's the takeaway? I think, right? Notice your parts. Notice if you're triggered.
Yep.
Look inside. Stop. Think. Feel.
All the above.
All the above.
But especially if there's one character that's taken over the show, you'll know it. Because you're feeling depressed, or you're feeling anxious, or you're drinking too much, or you're scrolling too much. Yeah. Like, it causes some disruption in the system. So, like, and then we can start to be like curious about that. Like, why is this part showing up? What is happening in the environment that's making me want to tune out or mute or react in this way?
Yeah. Yeah. So talk to your parts, befriend them. We say invite them in for coffee instead of kicking them out, because that's what's going to help them relax rather than, fighting them.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thank you for joining us today. Hopefully this was helpful. Start talking to all your different personalities. Thank them for coming.
And we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Shrinks on Tap. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.